Just at least have someone either can help with answers, answer the questions, or like, hey, I don't know, but talk to X, Y, and Z.
No, I
on
think being
better
a block
idea, but
list, we'll say
possibility to it.
subscribe.
I remember what was all on the
Yeah, I think
agenda.
mine's unsubscribed.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
Technically,
I saw it this morning at 7 AM and I had looked at it since.
Thanks for coming, guys.
it's not subscribed. I just, um, well, if they're a contact or a subscription, maybe that. Anyway,
Yeah, sorry, I don't
okay,
quite understand the differences in
there's
these contacts and.
the review on this was supposed to be that it was, but. Yes, really, I'll find it.
The list thing is. Some of these, it's been sent to us and delivered 0 times. That's all.
Unless they don't have, it's not a valid email address.
But here it says +1.
Oh, that's their, okay, so here's like Peterson. Peterson, they don't have an email, but they do have an email here.
I subscribed, it, so refresh and see it there.
Every time I go, I get something. I haven't thought out the probably.
There's somebody next to you.
Yeah. It was the guy that, bought probably some.
All right, well,
Yeah, no.
I'm gonna ask people tonight if they wanna,
No, they.
take it.
Right. I'm only talking to.
Watch it.
You know, I'm not much of a hockey fan, but I might tune into it.
Yeah, there's-
At least for a few minutes.
They got a little publicity stunt going there.
Have something else on TV and watch it on my phone here. Let's see how big the brawl is.
Yeah. After those guys are all teammates with each other.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Well, if we get.
Bob, didn't you remember the meeting or?
Point where I can.
Snippet of regulation. Stuff from the zoning office.
Yeah, email that to me. James, what, you let me know when you're ready.
Ready.
Okay,
That was easy.
all right. Okay, ready? We're gonna go. I'll call the meeting of the Tainter Lake Rehabilitation District, call it to order. And, let the record show that everybody is here. Nobody is absent. Probably be a longer meeting, Jerry. Because I'm here.
No doubt.
Okay, approval of the agenda of the regular meeting of 1/16 and 5 of the committee meeting minutes. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
There's been a motion to approve the minutes of the January 16th meeting and all of the subsequent committee meetings. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, motion carries. Adam, would you introduce Tyler, please?
Sure,
tonight we have Tyler Meesalk with the Wisconsin DNR as our guest speaker. He's gonna speak on aquatic invasive species, aquatic vegetation, and cover some questions that we emailed Tyler, and I guess we'll have a kind of an informal Q&A with him after as well, or if you guys have any questions, and I think even from the crowd, that'd be
Right,
fine.
right.
So, we'll try and answer those or have him answer those. So I'd like to thank Tyler for coming over. He's out of the Eau Claire office, and was more than gracious to show up. So, Mr. Tyler Meesalk.
Got the. You're live.
All right.
This is the
Clicker.
It goes the opposite way that you think it does, so,
Let me just play real quick, just to make sure. All right. Okay, we're good.
and it's going through Zoom, so it's a little bit late.
Yep, not a problem. So, as Adam introduced, I'm Tyler Stalk. I am with the Wisconsin DNR out of our Eau Claire office. My main job is the kind of west central Wisconsin aquatic and species coordinator. So I cover from, you can kind of think where Highway 51 is and 29. That's the general corridor that I cover. So from Marathon, Wausau area to kind of northwestern Wisconsin, Barron, Polk counties is kind of my northwest portion of it. So in total, 17 counties. It's not as easy as I would like to maybe get everywhere that everybody asked me to go, but at least nice that you guys are only 20 minutes away. So it's convenient for not only me, but for you guys as well. So kind of the main gist what we're gonna be going through today. Is invasive species and plant management, but I always like to start off with this because this is a career goal of mine. Being relatively still early in my DNR kind of natural resources career, people always call them plants weeds. My career goal is to at least get vegetation or plants is kind of goal number one that I have at that point in time, just because people always think maybe the flowers that they have in their flower patch are beautiful and they call them flowers, but to me, most of them probably come from different continents. So I would consider those weeds, but we don't consider that. So it's just eye of the beholder, kind of understanding things. So it's kind of a goal I have throughout this entire journey I'm on. Plants are good. They do provide habitat. They do take up nutrients. They're supposed to be in ecosystems. Other factors vary how much or how little there are, but in general, aquatic plants itself, they have a function. They serve multiple needs. They're meant to be in the body of water. Wildlife needs them. As we've seen with the past couple of winters, weather can play a big factor to not what we see just in the winter time, but also what we might see in the springs and summers. If we can think of how last year's winter was, minimal snow cover, minimal ice, relatively mild, that can allow light to penetrate ice if there's minimal to no snow, which then allows plants to continue to photosynthesize. We all know that plants need light, whether they're on land or underwater. Being able to get that light allows them to photosynthesize and continue creating carbohydrates and sugars that they need to continue growing. Water beneath where it's froze, it's in the mid-30s to right around 40. Some plants can still survive in there and grow as long as they have other conditions that are met. So being aware of that lets you understand that maybe what you see from last year to this year may be different, because this year we've had a lot more ice. It's been a lot colder, very minimal snow still, but now we've had a little bit of snow. And with that snow cover, along with that ice, maybe conditions might be different just because last year's winter and this year's winter are not the same. So as I kind of briefly mentioned, and as Adam alluded to as well, aquatic invasive species will be a portion of it. We'll kind of go through maybe species you guys haven't heard of. And I'll ask a few folks too, just to see other species they're kind of curious about. Maybe we can talk about those at the end as well. Aquatic plant management. I know we had some drawdown questions and cyanobacteria questions that are also provided. I'll go into those as best as I can, and go from there. So another thing I always like to have folks do and think about, because natural resources, snap of a finger, unfortunately, doesn't solve everything in a nick of time. It's just Mother Nature doesn't work that quick. So it's kind of always one of those, I want to make sure people are cognizant of what they're thinking about. Maybe when they talk to DNR staff or county staff, maybe somebody else on the water body as well. Hey, we're planning on doing X. Just always try to think, is the juice worth the squeeze? Sometimes a quick, easy patch is just that, it's a patch. And in the long term, you're still spending money, time, and effort on that issue. So just trying to prioritize and maybe figure out where is our money best suited, where is our time best suited, what should we be focusing on, and what stuff that's, whether it's low hanging fruit or it's something that might take 4 decades to get handled and covered. Just trying to think, is the juice worth the squeeze? Big thing that we have, especially in the AIS program, is working on prevention, but prevention itself can be a larger approach at the end of the day. Whether it's land use best management practices, aquatic invasive species education like this, working on trying to adhere to what maybe things that help your local grass that you have on your riparian area, just trying to think of what can we do to prevent any sort of ecological negatives possibly based upon just our human everyday uses at the end of the day. I know I was talking to Chuck about vehicles a little bit and kind of my background. Prevention is way cheaper than reaction. I kind of segue it into I've worked on cars as a kid growing up and for 25 plus years now. You don't want to skip an oil change. Oil change is preventative maintenance. You still got to pay for it at the end of the day unless you know how to do it. But it's cheaper than not doing the oil change, and also you got to get a new engine 10,000 miles later at the end of the day. Yes, an oil change might not prevent larger scale issues 200,000 miles down the road, but hey, instead of getting an engine every 50,000 miles, you're getting one every 200,000 K at that point. So I equate that also as just trying to find preventative measures you can do as residents of a body of water. And another couple of slides I always like to have folks do, just because a lot of people that I've kind of had to work with in the past, is they're kind of confused as to who they need to talk to, where to go, where can they maybe find stuff that's publicly available. Biggest thing I always want to have people understand is DNR, county folks, we're servants of the public. We're here to work for you guys at the end of the day. If you have questions and you have got ideas, you have thoughts, you want to run something by us, whether you're just someone who's concerned about maybe what kind of plants are in front of your body of water, maybe larger lake group discussions, what have you. County and DNR staff are there to help out. We'll help you out as best as we can. And feel free to get a hold of us. I don't care if I've got 20 questions of the same thing from the same lake from 20 different people. That's my job. I'm supposed to be doing that. I have no problem answering those questions. And this is just kind of where can I find stuff on our DNR Lakes pages that's publicly available. So you can type in Tainter Lake. You'll have the list of like myself, Alex Smith, who are water resource staff who deal with a lot of water quality based information. You can find maybe the fisheries biologist, which is Casey out of Baldwin. Maybe you've got questions on who's the dam engineer. That information is all publicly available for you. So you can maybe minimize how much kind of Google searching you have to do to find, okay, I'm interested in subject X. Who can I find to talk to that's going to be the direct contact that'll get my answers a lot quicker than maybe to customer service, and then you got to ping pong back and forth 2 hours, 2 days, whatever it is to get the correct contact. And a big thing for me with aquatic invasive species and aquatic plant management, because they are somewhat tied, is trying to change kind of old historic messaging that we as DNR definitely failed upon 30 years ago. And it's just kind of become normal to say some of this grammar that we have. And unfortunately, it makes it sound worse than it possibly could be, depending upon the current situation you guys are dealing with. So we can think of historically it was control or taking over, decimated, very militaristic style, aggressive grammar and language, which we don't want to say that it's not going to be an issue. But at the same time, though, in some systems, maybe presence of an invasive species, just because there's other factors that play into it, it might stay at relatively low levels. We do have some lakes in northern Wisconsin that have got Eurasian water milfoil trends. They've had them in those bodies of water for 20 years, roughly. They haven't had any management outside of just monitoring to see overall abundance. And they're hanging out at 1 to 3% on the entire body of water. When people are messaging 30 years ago, we did it at DNR, said, hey, you're just going to have a bunch of issues. As we know with time, we just understand, we learn more, and not everything is going to be just straightforward. Oh, you have this, you're going to have this. There's more to it than maybe what meets the eye at that point. understanding lake characteristics is also a big thing people need to kind of understand. In your case for Tainter, you guys are a lowland drainage body of water, so you're on the tail end of a watershed where all the water flushes. So because of that, you might have different characteristics. You might see varying sediment concerns, like we'll probably talk a little bit about. You might see differences in water quality versus lakes farther up in the watershed at that portion of time, and it's just based upon where you are geographically and the type of system that you are. So before I get into these, because I've got probably about half a dozen slides on species maybe you aren't all aware of, or have very minimally heard about. What are other species that you guys are kind of concerned about? And well, at the end, we can kind of maybe go and dive into those a little bit too. I know talking to Adam, zebra mussels is one that you guys are kind of curious about. Any others that you've heard or seen that you maybe want to spend a little bit of time on during this Q&A at the end of this?
I guess some common plants that we're seeing are Elodea,
Mhm.
frilly leaf pondweed, coontail, and
Should be Valsinaria if I remember correctly, kind of.
it's like a grass.
Yep, long and stringy, yep. Yep, yeah, Valsinaria or wild celery. If anybody duck hunts, canvasbacks, that's their favorite food. Just food for thought if you find that hanging around. So for the same scientific name, so kind of nice knowing what I know some days when I'm out doing stuff. I go, oh, I know this. Mallards or canvasbacks might be here if migration's right. But anyhow, back to kind of some invasive species. I think to keep an eyeball on, just because they're either relatively low abundance in the state. I don't think any of these are in this geographic region that I'm going to highlight. Or they're in nearby states at that point. I know Brazilian waterweed and hydrilla are ones that we did have, I believe, hydrilla in a small little lake in Portage County. And then it's been found in Michigan and Illinois, I believe, off the top of my head. So these two are tricky ones just because Elodea, which is common waterweed, which is a native to Wisconsin, there's a few other Elodeas as well. These two both kind of show similar characteristics, which is why I like to highlight these just because they're a little bit different, they're a little bit odd, they show similar physical identities, but there's a few small differences between them. So if you look at Brazilian waterweed, this can really resemble Elodea that's in really nutrient-rich systems, which Tainter Lake in this case is. And that whorling is a big identifier for it, being it has 4 to 8 leaves per whorl. So just think of, as it spins around, just take a single subsection, it'll have 8 leaves going around like a staircase at that point. Has serrated edges, definitely like softer, a little bit more organic sediments. Shallower bodies of water. Both of these came through aquaculture and through kind of people's backyard ponds at that point. From kind of organisms in trade, you can think of pet stores, so on and so forth, and that portion of it. And hydrilla, which is very similar to Brazilian waterweed, is another one that has serrated edges, but the difference is it's got teeth on the bottom edge of the leaf. So that's the two that we really focus on, and that's the real difference between both of these if we're trying to figure out which one is which. Once again, soft sediments and shallower bodies of water, these both prefer. And these are ones that we don't have over here at the moment. But at the same time, in systems we can think of southern US that's had it for decades. I think Florida, Georgia, Alabama, it's pretty prevalent. And those systems are not comparable to ours, so we can't say it's going to be the exact same. This is just off of what they do. And those guys do herbicide applications regularly for these as they create dense matting in some of their wetlands, shallow lakes down in kind of southeastern US. Water hyacinth and water lettuce. These two are pretty prominent, kind of Mississippi Gulf, Louisiana area. Pretty popular. You see them pretty common to see shows or videos of some of the coastal wetlands and the bayous and the swamps down in kind of that neck of the woods. Both of these are floating style aquatic species. Water hyacinth is definitely a very beautiful flower, I'll admit it. But it has been found in small quantities. It's been removed in the Mississippi River, so this is definitely one to keep an eyeball on. I know when I was up in Spooner, I had someone that had a rain garden or a pond, and they threw it off onto a bridge up in Hayward. And I got a phone call about it, had to go out and just had to quickly remove it. It was only a single plant, so that was good. We did some follow-up monitoring, didn't find anything, which is nice. But this is always kind of one, if folks have ponds in their backyards, keep an eyeball on, make sure they're not throwing it, just, oh, I don't need it anymore, I'm gonna throw it out the window and she'll deal with it. Not so good. Because they are free floating, definitely flowing water, they can be a bigger issue because they can just move as the water takes them. And then once they find that slow moving water, that's what they call home. And as far as reproduction goes, they can, if they have the right conditions, reproduce relatively quickly. They can make clones of themselves, and they can create those really dense localized areas at that point. Once again, being kind of upper Midwest, conditions that we've seen for other southern states, I wouldn't expect to see that. But it is possible to have them in small quantities and in areas where if they make matting, they don't longer allow maybe light to get through and other vegetation can grow in those areas because they no longer get light that they need to sustain light. Here's a couple, especially the Carolina fanwort that looks like coontail, various milfoils. Parrot feather, not as much to me, but to each their own as to kind of maybe what they think it may be. These are a couple ones that, once again, kind of southern US are more prominent. Parrot feather definitely, Carolina fanwort's a little bit more sparse throughout the US, but it's still been found. Both of them definitely like more nutrient-rich systems, as most places do. More disturbance, they're both going to like a lot better. They have like shallower systems. If they get the parrot feather, similar it as maybe Eurasian water milfoil, which a lot of folks are aware of. Fragmentation is a mode of movement for them, and they're both similar or part of those milfoil families as well. So definitely those habitats that milfoils, whether it's natives or non-natives, and what they inhabit, if there's disturbance and these guys happen to show up, they may be present in those scenarios. Biggest thing is understanding what they look like, how they move. A lot of these that I'm showing you, the pet trade, aquaculture is a big movement factor that we have for them. We have law enforcement staff that their job is literally just working on making sure stuff isn't supposed to be coming into the state that shouldn't be at that point. Non-native Phragmites, anybody been to Green Bay in the last, I don't know, day to 10 years that sees all the ditches and all the tall vegetation over kind of the Green Bay area that people are working with? Non-native Phragmites is that unfortunate plant at that point came through kind of coastal wetlands. And that was a scenario of just the general public wasn't aware, DNR wasn't aware of the species at the point of time, decades ago. And now we have kind of overall monocultures and ditches that can be site hazards for folks and that portion of it. Over here on this side of the state, we have it in relatively low quantities. I work with DOT. There's a few spots in 94 and on 29 that does have this plant. We work with DOT just because we don't manage those areas to go ahead and do chemical applications for that. And we just say, hey, DOT, we're on Highway 94. Here's your GPS coordinate. Stand is this big, this large, non-native frag. Can you please go ahead and go about it, just because we don't have the jurisdiction as DNR staff to do it, but DOT does. This is a big priority for not just me, but our invasive species program kind of on western Wisconsin. Just because it's relatively low quantities. If you kind of think from Highway 51 and west, there's maybe, if I'm talking my area and farther north past Spooner up towards Superior, there's maybe only 40 to 50 populations of varying sizes over in this area. Lake Wazee is about, or in Jackson County is really the bad stinker at that point. And that's more of a containment at this point, just because time, money, and effort is going to be a big issue, and it's going to cost millions of dollars to manage it. So trying to reallocate efforts between the counties and ourselves and trying to make sure that folks are aware of it. And we got to make sure it stays there and keep an eyeball. It stays only there and doesn't move anywhere else. Giant hogweed is another one that it's not aquatic actually, but it can handle wet feet. And this is one that's kind of shown up recently for me, more central Wisconsin, Marshfield, Portage County area. Just because relatively large and it can get mistaken for varying kind of house plants. We got a call from someone that put it in their backyard, had no idea what it was, and then they had rashes on their arms because it can be kind of a localized carcinogenic at that point. They had rashes going on. And depending upon how you are, some people can get very drastic blisters and bubbling going on. So it definitely can vary medically what someone may experience at that point. But this is one that they thought they had got beautiful flower from the local horticulture place. And all of a sudden it's 10 feet tall. It's not what they expected. And all of a sudden we're trying to figure out what it is and how it got there and just making sure that, okay, where did you get it from? Work with that cap just to see, was this a random one-off? Is this just a mix-up? Everybody's human, mistakes happen. Or was this deliberate and do we need to now figure out where it came from and have to possibly do enforcement actions at that point? So this is one, keep an eyeball on, more on wet scenarios or uplands at that point, but just due to possible medical health concerns, I always like to throw it in there. And then a couple of ones you don't think about very often just because of where we're located. Even the red swamp crayfish, we did have a run-in with our stray runaway off of a crayfish boil over near Lake Altoona. So that was a 2-week excursion to try to see if we could find anything anywhere else between Lake Altoona and the Eau Claire River. We didn't find anything. It was just a random runaway that someone had. And in Wisconsin, we're not allowed to have folks bring in live aquatic species at that point, just due to the chance that these guys can be escapees, or you dump them in a pond, you miss something in your nearby waterway. Red swamp crayfish, everyone's aware of maybe the rusty crayfish. These guys can get much larger. As you can see, someone's hand, they can get 4 to 8 inches in length. These are what are relatively used pretty commonly for crayfish boils. That you see in probably in southern US states. Bright red spots, kind of bluish on the claws, are very distinct factors. Size of the big ones. And these guys, if they get in the system and the conditions are right, and they have rusty crayfish, these guys will easily outcompete even rusty crayfish at that point. Round gobies, which are another one, if you think of minnows being the big vector for how these guys move, which is how they got in the Great Lakes. Anyway, and they're pretty prominent. These guys can go ahead and eat eggs of various aquatic fishes, can make changes to kind of overall fish assemblage just due to their overall prevalence. Some fish do eat them over time as they kind of adjust their diet. You can think of smallmouth bass in the Great Lakes. Definitely will prey on these guys. But the big kind of characteristics that we use for these guys, because they can look similar to maybe a mud minnow, or you can think of a sculpin possibly as well, if anyone's aware of kind of those general species. If you flip them over on the bottom side of the belly, they have that fused pelvic fin. And that's the key characteristic that really allows you to quickly identify whether it's a round goby or maybe sculpin, mud minnow, another species at that point that's in your minnow bucket. Relatively small, prolific breeders, but these guys can definitely become an issue as we've seen on the Great Lakes. And then the one, I don't know if folks are aware, but we had a silver carp confirmation over in Chippewa and Black Rivers this past summer. They're not up in your guys' area, and we saw them going back towards the Mississippi River. Kind of our conclusion at this point is kind of due to the warm spring, relatively mild runoff that we had initially, and then the rain events that we had kind of late June, early July, was that climate factor that, hey, spawning time, we now have access to go over the Chippewa and Black Rivers because we got enough flow during the water temps that we need for spawning. Handful of them came up and they got stuck at the Eau Claire Dells, or the Dams Dell, the Dells Dam over in Eau Claire. Black River, same situation, same concept, similar time frame, and that aspect of it. We don't have any confirmation that there's a current population. It's more so they'll visit up from the Mississippi River and then they'll go back downstream as winter seasons comes on. So wouldn't surprise us if we occasionally see them if climatical conditions are provide the triggers for them to maybe come up into the Chippewa rivers and that portion of it. We could think the Red Cedar River, which comes out of Monoman, is a possible, just another area that they may go up if there's enough water volume for them to go through. And we want to make sure people aren't aware that, hey, you got a silver carp, let DNR staff know, whether it's myself, fishery staff for confirmation. don't want people catching one by the dam and then throwing it up into Lake Monoman or up in a Tainter Lake at that point, because then that's another whole can of worms there. Because then that could possibly maybe allow them to stay around at that point too. So we just need to keep folks' eye that just because geographically where you're at, Triple Rivers and Black Rivers aren't super far away, it is possible, and don't transport these guys live. If you catch one, let us know. We'll have, whether it's ourselves, DNR wardens, fishery staff, someone who's available to come grab it, make sure it's not put back in a body of water at that point. And then, how many of you are kind of getting into the water quality side of things now? Kind of more APM, water quality combo, are aware that Tainter and Monoman Lakes are part of the Red Cedar TMDL? You guys are? Okay. Some people aren't, some people are, so just sometimes I get deer in headlight looks for it. Here's just a general rundown of what TMDL focuses on. Primarily looking at phosphorus reductions, looking at both point sources and non-point sources. So you can think of point source wastewater treatment plant that's effluent from the facility that goes into a body of water. We can think that of as point source pollution. And then non-point source can be stuff that, hey, maybe you got something on the landscape, rain, leaches into the ground, and now it transports through groundwater or possibly through surface water at that point. And that's kind of what we consider non-point. Biggest thing here with the TMDL and in general is that water quality starts at the landscape. It doesn't start at the body of water. That's the sink. That's where everything goes. That's where it all ends up, and that's where you see conditions at that point. So making sure people are aware that what you do on the land within the watershed that's 100 miles away might have a factor to what you guys might be dealing with at that point. We do have annual reports to UW Extension that kind of tracks progress over time, saying, hey, we've got over in this watershed, we've seen reductions of X percentage. Here's what they've done. Here's maybe how they went about doing it. And that's where you can find information on kind of how that's tracking at that point. We haven't hit that 65% goal, but hopefully one day we'll be able to get it back to natural conditions. So aquatic plant management, which definitely is a key topic for you guys. I know Alex Smith, myself, and Ben Ewalt, we're all water resource staff, to our Eau Claire office. We were out on Tainter Lake and did a point intercept survey, which is a plant survey that we did. Definitely well aware that the eastern end, where you got a lot of sediment coming in, is where there's definitely a lot of vegetation, and the rest of the lake is relatively devoid of it. Got some pockets kind of going into towards the Hay River portion of it, and some of the bays, and then as you go a little bit farther upstream. But definitely on that eastern end for you guys is where you see a lot of the plant management. We had a hard time navigating through it, and that definitely can be considered a dense bed. There's no doubt about that. Biggest thing here with your guys' plant concerns is the plants are there because that's where the sediment's coming in. So that's why you're seeing what you're seeing at that point. It's not just, hey, there's plants here, there's a problem. The sediment's the driving factor specifically to why you're seeing the plant conditions that you are. And because they're nutrient-rich sediments on top of it, they have that fertilizer, so to speak, that plants need to grow. It's shallow, so it's got the light they need, got the nutrients they need, fertile sediment, shallow water. It's just the right combo to have plants be present in that scenario. So what that tells us is definitely sediment's got to try to be figured out, maybe addressed. And it's not easy, definitely not. But trying to figure out that sediment load coming in would hopefully minimize that plant bed and that sedimentation that's taking place on that east end of Tainter Lake. APM plan is definitely a key thing that always kind of comes up. Definitely varies from body of water to body of water. Some are more complex, some are more straightforward. So some people, a plan might be a simple one pager with a handful of bullets saying we're Lake X. We're only going to be doing this. Here's what we're doing it. Here's our time frame. Okay. More of an outline than an actual plan. Some bodies of water definitely need much larger documents because they're more in depth to what they plan on doing. So it's ultimately going to vary from one to the next. APM, lake comprehensive plans really are only a requirement to have a DNR determination for surface water grant eligibility. And NR 109, which kind of relates to harvesting specifically, we have it in code where DNR may require a plan, where it doesn't say you need a plan. So depending upon the body of water, obviously working with Alex and myself will kind of dictate or kind of lead you to, hey, you only need to be doing this. And I got some plan recommendation slides anyhow, so we'll kind of hopefully get that handled right away. Harvesting, which has kind of been the main plant management method that's kind of come up in conversations I've had with a few folks. Once it starts, generally doesn't ever end. Some bodies of water, they're harvesting from pretty much post fishing opener, so they're not bugging people in the body of water till middle of September, just because of how the systems are. Some people are maybe only a handful of days, and that's just kind of nuisance navigation relief. They create a spoke, like think of a bike wheel or something at that point, and say, hey, you only got to come here for 3 days, and we're done after that, and that's all we need to do. So it's going to vary on the overall scale and how much it's done, but as a generality, harvesting never truly ends for body of water once they start. So this is our kind of plan recommendations that Alex and I have for you guys related to your system. Simple, relatively nutrient dense system to flow through body of water. So we're not even going to consider herbicide application just because it's not going to work. And it's a patch at the end of the day as well. And you're going to be spending lots of money there. And it's just going to be repeat also. So because of that, harvesting is kind of the route we tend to have folks go to, just because a little less harm. People are aware of kind of the long term what it's going to be, and primarily going to be used for navigational relief only. Our recommendations for you guys is on that eastern end where all the sediment and vegetation is present, just doing navigation lanes on that north shore and that south shore to the last residence at that point, however far that is, if it's 100 feet, 100 yards, whatever that is. We did find some wild rice on that north end, way in that northeast corner, relatively sparse. I did worked a lot of ceded territory stuff, and I believe this area is in that ceded territory, so it is protected through some court rulings. So just being aware of that presence definitely is one thing we got to be considerate of. And we've got that information on the plant survey, so we can figure out exactly kind of where that's located. So, okay, harvesting can't go past here because this is where the rice starts. Because then if we allow harvesting of rice, there's tribal consultation that comes into it, which can bring in Glyphwick or White Task Force at that point. For you guys, all we'd need for a plan would be just the body of water. We don't need the entire body of water. We know it's going to be the eastern end at that point. Just a map depicted of those navigational lanes. They're whatever distance, 50 feet wide, 100 feet wide, whatever it is. Roughly time of year that you plan on doing stuff, and every year is different. So it could just be a generalization that, hey, we're planning on doing harvesting starting June 1st, and we hope to be done end of July. If it changes, that's fine. That's not a problem. Just contact me, Alex, just say, hey, we're gotta do an extra 2 weeks or whatever. Like, that's fine, not a problem. Knowing where you're gonna be taking that vegetation that's harvested definitely is a big thing. It's in aquatic plant management permits as well, but having that site identified, it's good fertilizer for farmers. A lot of people up north, I can think of the Chetek chain and Apple River flowage that do a lot of harvesting every day. The farmers love it because it's great fertilizer for their fields at that point. Or maybe work with people in Lake Group, and if they got gardens in their backyard for vegetables or what have you. There you go. Go ahead and keep it right by the body of water. You can go ahead and use it for compost at that point as well. Main justification for us and for you guys is going to be improving boating access, as Alex and I are aware. Definitely can get stuck multiple times while doing plant surveys on the eastern end. I have no idea how long we struggled to get out of that bay, but it took us a while. I do remember that. And it was not fun, and it was miserable, and I felt like I was paddling for days. But justification is real simple. Hey, we can't navigate, we get stuck every 5 feet. We're aware of that. That makes sense. Not a problem. Thumbs up. All right, we're good to go at that point. So that's all kind of from Alex and I's viewpoint that we would see would be sufficient and relevant for what you guys deal with. If there is questions along the way, feel free to reach out to us. That's what we're here for. I got no problem answering stuff as best as I can. And maybe Alex will say something he gets to before I do, but we're on the same page generally anyway, so not a problem. Drawdowns were another key question that was brought up. Some of the questions were, have other places done drawdowns? The answer is yes. How often do they do it? Some do annual. I can think of kind of peat and well flowage. They do annual drawdowns every single year. Some places it's not very often. And there's a litany of reasons as to why people do it, whether it's a dam breaks, they have an issue with it. So you gotta draw it down so you can do the work at that point. Some places sediment compaction is the main reason for it. Like management, absolutely. Mine flowage did it for years, water milfoil a handful of years ago. Maybe there's some restoration work for shorelines that's also taking place. So there's a couple of different ways that people do drawdowns for. Spring runoff, definitely part of the bigger river systems is a key thing, especially in Wisconsin. There's a big thing there for spring runoff. So they just have that storage once you have snow melting in the spring. Drawdowns generally obviously relate to reservoirs because they're dammed up. Every body of water that has a dam in itself, for the most part, is a reservoir. There's a handful of places that don't, but majority of bodies of water are definitely considered reservoirs. Not all drawdowns are tied to hydroelectric facilities. I got Clam Falls Flowage up in Polk County. They did a drawdown, kind of twofold plant management and dam repairs, but it's not a hydroelectric dam, so that wasn't any consideration to be thought of at that point in time. It was county owned and operated, so that's how that whole concept was going. For you guys, unfortunately, a lot of your sediment that you're seeing is sand. So sand, which drawdowns that are done for sediment compaction, that's more of your organic matter. That's a lot fluffier, has a lot more air, so to speak, in it. And once it freezes, it definitely compacts a lot tighter because sand is much more coarse and the nature of how that sediment is. It might compact that 1/10 of an inch might be all it'll do, and that's just taking a little bit of the water out. So compaction with sand really doesn't actually happen. So for you guys, maybe it's not what you wanted to hear, but it's just kind of the nature of the beast at that point.
So the federal agreement with the Excel Dam on Tainter says they have to maintain a certain level, like 6 inches.
Yep.
For all time, so a drawdown isn't possible, is it? I mean,
So
it's in their contract, they can't do it.
with that, not, so if we can think about it, some places work with our DNR FERC coordinator, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission coordinator, the dam engineers, and then other DNR staff like myself, Alex Fisheries, so on and so forth, that all kind of have a natural resources specialty that work with it. And maybe can have a discussion that says, hey, I know I had a discussion with Holcomb because they were curious about it. It wasn't going to happen at that point, but historically, Lake Holcomb used to drop down feet at that point. But there's conditions within their permits that dams have for their operating height. Says, hey, between this time and this time, you got to be at 900 feet or whatever it is. And between this time and this time, you got to be between 901 and 902, what have you. They can be and they have been adjusted in other systems. I just won't say that for you guys. Oh yeah, it's just contact us and it'll happen. It's not as simple as that, unfortunately. And you may hear no. Just forewarning that no might be the answer you get. Might not be the answer you want, but it might be what happens, unfortunately. And then for dredging too, kind of the same process as far as if you guys consider it, understanding the costs, obviously it's definitely a big cost in that portion of it. It's going to be something that repeatedly happens until you address kind of sedimentation characteristics up in the watershed. It's just going to be a continual thing at that point. How often you do it would vary, obviously, if it's given the okay. But it kind of follows a similar process of having multiple DNR staff involved, trying to get comments on it, seeing what are the positives or negatives if there are any of any kind, and then proceeding there through a permitting process. I would say in this case, not aware of what staff would think, so I'm not going to say yes would happen. Just dredging is not that simple, and don't be surprised if you get told no as well there.
A question for you on drawdowns. And you talked about the sand not compacting. But will the drawdown affect the vegetation? Is it enough time on a winter drawdown to affect the vegetation along the shoreline? Because that's really what you're drawing down is for vegetation would be to draw it down and hopefully eliminate the vegetation close to shore, right? Is that-
You could, but at the same time, to play devil's advocate, depends upon how the winter goes. So you could do a drawdown and say you have last year's winter that was mild, you had no frost. So you think, hey, we're gonna draw it down 2 feet, just for the sake of the example. And frost only got down 6 inches. Well, now you've got seed bed that didn't freeze out. So it was kind of a moot act at that point because you got that seed bed that's currently present in there. So there's a little bit more than just that at the end of the day. I think case that you guys have, especially you have a lot of kind of generalist species that can handle a lot of kind of disturbance. And we've seen them come back within a year or two in some sets, especially one that's like you guys have relatively shallow water in that area back to fertile sediments. I wouldn't be surprised if you start seeing vegetation coming back pretty quickly, even after a drawdown at that point with good freezing taking place. So it's definitely gonna be a tough act of trying to figure out kind of next steps, but definitely the biggest thing here, I kind of want to get you guys to be aware of is the sediment is really the big one upstream. That if you can get that under control, that'll minimize the issues you currently have at that point. You're focusing on maybe the symptom, but you're not focusing on the disease, kind of the big thing, kind of if you understand what I'm saying there.
Yeah, and I'm going by your first slide. I like the saying, is the juice worth the squeeze?
Yep.
And because with the last line there, obviously it is a complex issue.
Mhm.
I'm just saying from the beginning, is there the science that says if we have a drawdown, we're gonna have less vegetation?
As a generalization, yes.
Okay,
With the asterisk next to it, that
Maybe.
Mother Nature still dictates what's gonna go on.
right.
Yeah.
Okay,
I mean, Eau Claire River, we're in my hometown, definitely would do a drawdown sometimes. That was more organic sediments at that point. It definitely, for the channel, would help out for a handful of years in that portion of time too, so. Characteristics of the system also plays a factor into it as well.
and what you just said makes a lot of sense. It doesn't mean that it has to happen every year. It could
Yeah.
happen every 3 years.
Yeah, some places in that portion of it too, and that's changing of permit conditions for the hydroelectric companies at that point in time, if they agree to it. Things along those lines as well, so. Also, I mean, it's definitely a bigger conversation that needs to be had.
Right.
At that point, at the end of the day, and it's hard right now for me to just say, hey, it's gonna happen. I can't say that unfortunately.
Yeah, well, I'm just trying to figure out if. Because there's a lot of potential for no's there. And so that means that we have to go with a lot of reasons why. And obviously, if you have the science behind you, it's a nicer hill to stand on than, just somebody's opinion.
Mhm. Yeah,
Okay.
You know of other lakes that are on hydroelectric bandwidth? No, you said Pete Well is like Lake.
Minong flowage, definitely that's the one I was really a part of when I was up in Spooner. That was invasive species based from that portion of it as well. They got a lot of regional water milfoil up there, and that's a very big flow through system as well. And they've done herbicide management just because it's a flow through system, it didn't work. So you got to do mechanical methods like harvesting for navigation. And then a drawdown was found to be kind of a really the best option up there. And there's a lot of organic sediments up there too, which is why it made sense from that portion of it also. And it's a really good walleye system. So that fluctuation actually kind of helped maybe a little bit of a bump for the walleye up there. And then it's a really good wild rice body of water as well. So tribal support was also there as well, because rice likes that kind of change over time and that complex low years, high years, as well. So that was a really big one. They dropped down feet up there. And if I remember correctly, hydroelectric dam, and I could be misspeaking a little bit, but through our surface water grant program, they had a plan. It was eligible as an activity for a plant management method. And they got grant funding to supplement the energy losses from the drawdown of however many feet it was at that point during that year. Is ultimately kind of what happened at that point. That was thousands of dollars at that point, but that was kind of the most recent one I was aware of. Hydroelectric dams on the Wisconsin River, They primarily do it for water storage in the spring, just because Wisconsin River is such a big system going from Rhinelander north to southwestern Wisconsin at that point. Where the Red Cedar is much smaller, and that, so the overall kind of scale of runoff is much less just because of geography and the size of the system. But that's what they do over there, and that's specifically just water storage is what they do it for. Okay. Cyanobacteria and blue-green algae. Definitely, you guys are aware of that, Monoman, how many green days you got per year. Definitely seen pretty consistently, and it's not always fun to have to see it when you're driving down the road, unfortunately, but that relates back to kind of the water quality and land use within the watershed at that point. You guys, once again, are the sink. So everything gets collected by you guys, unfortunately. So because of that, excess nutrients, you get issues like cyanobacteria or blue-green algae, or HABs, which are harmful algal blooms that can affect pets, can affect people as a possibility. Unfortunately, for DNR, we pretty much don't permit chemical applications with copper as the main thing. For blue-green algae over here, especially in your guys' case, it'd be, once again, a patch. It wouldn't be solving the issue. So I burn money when it'll come back the next day because you got excess nutrients flowing in anyway. So it's kind of just a waste of time, money, and effort. Being the disease in this case is the land use and the overall water quality within the watershed is what's driving it. But for you guys being aware and trying to figure out, okay, we have a lot of blue-green algae and we need to focus on the watershed. Maybe where can we start? Can we work with our riparian ring that we live on? Do I need to maybe talk to local municipalities if that water comes in our area? Just trying to think upstream at who affects you at that point. And everyone has a piece of the pie. Focusing on just one entity sometimes and calling them the big bad wolf, sometimes nothing gets done. Also, because you're telling them they're the problem, you fix it, because then it'll help me. What do they get out of it then possibly too? So just understanding everyone's got a piece of it. Just how big your slice of the pie is could be really tiny or really large, and just where you're located is a big factor. I know there was a couple of questions also on riparian rights for dredging. I don't know off the top of my head specifically what it might be, whether it's you're legally allowed to do a certain cubic footage. I'm not aware. I don't know, so I'm not going to say, hey, you guys are fine to do this much. I'm not aware. Vicky Nelson or Jacob Nadeau, they're both out of kind of northwest Wisconsin. I think Vicky's in Cumberland and Jake is in the Spooner office. They're the waterway staff that can address those questions because they kind of know the code a lot better than I do. And they can tell you, hey, yeah, you're legally allowed to do up to this much, or you're not allowed to do anything at that point. They'll give you the best answers versus me trying to shoot from the hip and maybe give you the wrong thing. Things I think lake groups, regardless of how your system is, should always be doing. Mother Nature likes to have natural shorelines, so trying to keep things as natural as possible without minimizing as much human disturbance. I mean, if we all need to access body of water, I thoroughly understand that. Your access to your dock and your boats at that point, understandable, not a problem. We try to maintain the shorelines as much as possible. Keep the vegetation that maybe isn't impeding navigation there. If you got woody habitat, fish love that, other wildlife loves it. Just let it be outside of if it's impeding navigation. Okay, fine. But let Mother Nature just be Mother Nature. We do have a Healthy Lakes program, which is available year round. So you can apply for that grant 24/7, 365, $1,000 per practice. There's 5 different practices in there. If you guys want to do anything, because think of rain gardens, infiltration pits, adding more coarse woody habitat, can all be a few things to think about. And that can be done whenever you guys feel like it. Continual education, like having folks such as myself or UV Extension, just anybody who's kind of a natural resource individual, that's a topic that you're curious about learning on. Try to always learn, because just the fact of life, you just got to always be learning. You always need to learn something new every day, right? The Red Cedar Watershed Conference is actually going to be in about 2-3 weeks roughly. I think it's the 14th of March. That focuses on kind of what work is being done by multiple counties within the watershed. I know I've seen a handful of folks there in the past, but if you can, I recommend going there, because there's always something I get out of it annually every single year, another topic I think about, and maybe you guys being a lake district can maybe get a contact with someone in a different county or a producer led group that does a lot of stuff in your area, and just start that connection and thinking about, okay, how can we help you and how can you help us? I scratch your back, you scratch mine. Removal of fertilizer use in some counties, no phosphorus-based fertilizers is illegal at that point, be put on their riparian bodies of water. Mother Nature didn't need fertilizer for thousands of years. Why do we think we need it all of a sudden now? It's perfectly fine. Don't need to worry about it. Generally too, shorter grass, geese like, and if people have problems there, I tell them, hey, just stop cutting your grass, stop fertilizing so the grass isn't so green and maybe they don't bug you anymore. So trying to remove fertilizer use is definitely a big one as well. Trying to find ways to either conserve, protect, restore land use that you have within your respective watershed is always the biggest thing. With the caveat that it's all capacity based at the end of the day. How big are you? How much money do you have? How many people do you have that are bought into it? And understand that, hey, we're planning on doing X. It might take 10 years. And you don't start seeing any improvements in year 1, year 2, year 3, but year 5, year 6, you start seeing that. And just having realistic expectations for folks. Because yes, we all want stuff to be done in the snap of fingers and be good. Mother Nature doesn't work that way, unfortunately. It's much easier to take a hammer and break a window than it is to put a window back in, right? Just understanding what you can do, who you have, and I know I've seen a lot of it too burn out within lake groups as well. Just because maybe there's only 1 or 2 folks always driving the bus and been doing it for 20 years and they got nobody else to help them out at that point. So understanding what you can do is always a wonderful thing. And lake groups that are aware of that are the ones that we continually see consistency and improvements over time on their body of water. And going into kind of the shoreline portion of what you guys can always be doing. Who here thinks the before is beautiful, but the after is better? I know I'm one of them, just because Mother Nature doesn't like to be bare. You always go outside, Mother Nature wants to be covered up as much as possible. They did a great job in landscaping, I'll admit it, on the before photo. It's a wonderful job there, but we want to make sure we've got a bunch of shoreline in, emergent and submergent vegetation. You know, you got a bunch of bulrush and crappies love that when they're spawning. That's a spot you want to be hanging your bobber in early June when water temperature 60 degrees. And that's where you're going to have a lot more wildlife taking place. And you're going to see a lot more reptiles, maybe various birds in that portion of it. Try to keep it as natural as you can and undisturbed as possible. It's definitely what we want to be because that's what Mother Nature was before humans, and that's what we want to try to get it back to as best as possible. So, reminders I always tell folks is definitely consult with us if you got any questions before maybe doing something. We're here to help you. If you got an idea, run it by us. We can lead you in the right direction versus trying to Google something and it takes you 5 days and finally get a hold of us and go, oh yeah, you should have been doing this and had it taken you 30 minutes. Just maximizing your time as well is always the biggest thing. Focusing on preventative things, whether it's best management practices on the landscape, boat launches, having educational stuff saying, hey, you got vegetation on your boats, remove it, keep it here. We don't want it going somewhere else. Or if you're coming from a different body of water, make sure your boat's clean prior to entering our body of water, i.e. zebra mussels being a big one. And then I'm thinking large picture. Everyone, I know I was up north when I first started up there about 5 years ago. A lot of people kind of that, oh, the lake, water line. Like, there's more to it than that, guys. It's just, there always is. It's just not as simple. So thinking larger picture is going to be the way for not just you guys, but just lakes in general to kind of either maintain what they currently have or to try to restore it to what it should be naturally. Once you start doing that, start thinking of various ideas, try to figure out long-term approaches that might not happen till after my lifetime for all we know. But just you start now, it'll happen eventually, but you got to start somewhere. And then bunch of information folks can look at, whether it's watershed information, kind of the Water Explorer, or WEX as we call it, is more specific to bodies of water, kind of tells you your current conditions, some models based upon projections of, hey, you've got land uses X percentage of municipality, agriculture, pasture, wetland, forested. You can kind of get ideas for maybe where nutrients are coming into the body of water as well. Data viewer just shows you kind of where you're located within the watershed. You can get a larger watershed map. You can see kind of where it all goes to. Wisconsin Water Search is something we use that has all the various monitoring events. Maybe tells you an impairment if you have one. And then the Aquatic Plant Explorer is a relatively new one as well that shows information we have in our database and what plants are present on a body of water to the most recent year of a survey. They can kind of show you heat maps of, hey, the east end is where the dense vegetation is relatively sparse with the rest of the body of water. Here's the 6 species that are pretty common, or the 10 species that were found. I think if I remember correctly, for you guys, I think you were low double digits, if I remember correctly, right around that 10 to 12 range. So relatively general common species for sure. But that's the information you can kind of see and maybe track changes over time too. Maybe the last survey was done 15 years ago. Plants are the same or they've changed drastically. As my contact info, once again, myself, Alex Smith is another contact you guys can reach out to regarding questions for you guys at Lake. We're here to help. Feel free to call us, emails, texts. That's my work cell. So if you got a text message too, it's fine by me. Doesn't matter. Just understand that phone call for me, I'm gonna pick up pretty quickly. You leave me an email, it might be 4 hours till I get back to you. So just depending upon kind of what the question is, it's something that, hey, this can wait, I don't need to know it right now, or versus, hey, we got an issue right now. The phone call is gonna, unless I'm doing field work and I can't get my phone, I'm pretty much gonna pick up at that point. And we can maybe help you out a lot quicker. And that's that.
Questions?
Any questions? I've got time. Yeah,
Yeah, about that, TMDL, what's that acronym and question, like, you said you want to use phosphates for like 65%?
yep.
Like, where are you at now and why did you pick up 65%?
So the 65%, I guess I'll answer the first question. TMDL stands for total maximum daily load is what it is. So you can just think of how much of a certain thing is coming in daily is kind of the general way of saying it. The TMDL was pre my time. I was just in college when the TMDL was formatted in 2012. So Pat Oldenburg was a part of that. He still works for us out of the Eau Claire office. He can maybe go more in depth to how that 65% number came to be at that point. If I remember correctly, just off reading reports, that was what the models said to get back to natural conditions from that portion of it. So that's, I believe, where the number came from. As what models they used. Bathtub, I believe, is what the one that was done back in 2012. Pat would know and confirm in that portion of it. So that's where the metrics ultimately came from.
How much has it been reduced?
I'm not aware off the top of my head because I generally don't deal with the TMDL stuff. I deal with more plant management and EIS information at the end of the day. So I'd have to go back and read the reports that were linked in there to find out what the percentage is.
Has there been a lot of work done in an effort to?
There's been a lot of work done, but there hasn't been enough.
So I mean, I guess that's
And-
my concern with it is it sounds like we can't do anything.
It's the biggest thing is awareness is in that portion of it and where to start. Just because it's such a large scale and you guys are at the tail end of it. I mean, the Red Cedar River starts up in Barron County by Rice Lake. So you got to start thinking of what can we do or help out with from Rice Lake down on in. I can think of Lake Petenwell and Castle Rock that they understand that they got watershed issues and they pay farmers to put in cover crops to help them out. And Petenwell has seen decreases in nutrient loading through nitrates and phosphorus because farmers didn't have the incentive to do anything within that watershed, and they're actually seeing changes at that point. So it can be done. Trying to figure out where to start is always the key thing, and where to put our money and how much money do we have that we can give to someone else at that point in time. And definitely county staff is another big area in that portion of it too, and trying to get them to all be involved. And every county has varying levels of staff, so their capacity always all changes as well. Some counties maybe only have 1 or 2 staff in their entire conservation departments. The ability to do a whole lot of projects is pretty minimal. So there's a lot of factors that come into it at the end of the day, and trying to get multi-county, multi-lake group individuals all bought in is gonna be the way to go. And we've tried to get conversations started. That's why right here, Watershed Conference is a really good spot for a lot of people to come into because it's everyone within it that you can now talk and say, hey, we're so-and-so, we're at Tainter Lake. We understand we've got some issues, sedimentation maybe being a big one. Trying to figure out maybe restoration work and how to go about doing it. I mean, you've got that stream bank that's hundreds of feet long that I think is scouring upstream of that delta that's taking place. That's not a simple project. That's gonna be thousands upon thousands of dollars, and I could recommend restoration grants, but that's not just a penny in the bucket for what.
We're not there yet.
No, yeah, and then, well, and the restoration grants for us are $25,000, and that's, hey, it's a start,
Yep.
but it's not gonna be enough.
Well,
That,
that's my concern is that if every year we lose more and more of that upper end of the lake, people who own the lake properties have lost any way to access the lake.
Mhm.
They're not happy about that, and I think there's somebody has to be their voice on this board to try to be able to get that back for them. There's all sorts of muck right off the sandbar there. Like if you step off in the wrong spot, it's up to your hip.
Mhm.
And it just sounds to me like the same old thing I've heard for the last 30 years around here, that we need to fix up the stream and we have to just deal with it in August. And I struggle with that. I think,
But if there isn't any good news regarding that, is Al and I go to a meeting with a group that starts out in the Rice Lake area, and there are people there from Chautauqua and all the way down the river right here into Menominee. And they're all working on the same things we are.
but is it working? Is it reducing the phosphorus load?
Slowly,
Yes.
slowly.
In the large bank we're talking about, where large cost to fix where, have you ever seen a project which just straightens out that piece instead of being a big, as you look at the map, you can just see these big bends that are being eaten away. Do they ever get, is straightening it out ever a solution?
I'd hate.
Have you ever seen that?
I don't usually, we try to keep natural meanders in the system as best as possible. I'd say a lot of it is, I mean, because you look at old scour lines and oxbows, the various rivers too, and the meandering is natural at the end of the day. The biggest thing there, which is why you're seeing excessive, is because there's nothing as a structure on the stream bank itself to handle that water hitting it. Is why it's continually eroding at that point in time. If you let it be naturally, it might go ahead and create its own new lane, and then all of a sudden you'll have a back oxbow lake at that point. But that might be decades before you see that change too at that point in time too. So it's, yeah.
Actually, ended up talking to Alex Smith about that thing about straightening it out.
Yep,
that thing, and
yep.
He just mentioned one word, billions.
Yeah, that's, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's back to money is always the limiting factor on doing a lot of stuff at that point in time. I mean, we could provide grant dollars, but it's just a penny in the bucket. 25 grand is like, okay, cool. It's not gonna get you very far. Unfortunately,
Looking at it, it
Yeah.
just seems like it'd be easier to straighten it out than to try and fix a bank that's just been falling down. for
yeah,
years.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. It's not as easy as you wish some days, right?
Most things.
Yeah.
I do have one other question about drawdowns. You said that the sand compaction isn't much,
Correct.
and that'd be where it gets exposed, but do people use drawdowns to carve channels? Like the water has to flow through that sandbar area on the east side of the lake somewhere. So will it pick 2 or 3 where they're naturally lower now? Will it pick those 2 or 3 areas and cut those a little bit deeper? That would actually end up creating some navigational lanes around the outside where the shoreline is, and maybe there, if you go up there and you screw around long enough where you get stuck enough times like you did,
Yep.
there are a few, like, you can get a boat a little bit further in certain areas, you know, they're a little bit deeper.
Possible, sure. But as soon as you raise the water level back up, and depending upon what they're allowed to do from an operating range, it might be a moot activity as well. In that portion of it also. Whereas, okay, you think you're gonna get water movement to localized channels, whatever, how many that would be, in the locations that they currently have. But if the conditions for a permit, let's just say, or say you guys are raising levels back up May 1st and how the winter goes or whatever it is slow. It's back to Mother Nature will always win, especially too. So it might be an activity done with that's good hearted, and maybe DNR staff say, sure, obviously through much more in-depth conversations. But then that might take place and it was an all for naught activity also. And to some extent too, that sand, even if it localizes channels, it's still gonna find that slowest spot where those channels are farther west now and start creating more deltas farther west at that point. So it'll just keep taking that issue farther and farther into the body of water as well. So there's definitely that needs to be considered from that portion of it as well.
Yeah.
Cause then you might be creating localized deltas that are out to the bend where the Hay River comes in, and now you've got the folks that are farther out too, maybe having issues also. So it's not as easy as we want it to be, like, once again.
Does anybody else in the public have any
I know you
questions?
had one,
Because
sir.
we're
Yep.
kind of running short of time here.
The new site a scientific study which tells us that the living algae is a result of the runoff from the water.
Oh, there's plenty of information out there that there's plenty of information that excess nutrients in the system.
Is there a study that says that's the cause of the blue-green algae?
So the nutrient loading,
Helping the GMDL. And they assumed at the beginning that that's where it came from. There was no scientific literature cited.
so with
Now, second question, are you aware of the geological makeup of this part of Wisconsin?
so yes to the second answer, because that's a little bit easier to say for me.
You know, geologically, what is, important about where
A
we.
lot of sandstone being a big one.
There is very, and this study was made maybe 50 years ago. We are in a portion of Wisconsin which has unusually high amounts of phosphorus in the soil.
Correct.
Okay, so what does that tell you? Groundwater brings that in to the lake? Possibility? Nobody, you know.
As a piece of it, sure. But to play devil's advocate, sir, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. It's not my job to know that. That's where Pat Oldenburg.
A very thorny problem. And all I heard today was what they cannot do.
So
And you're from DNR. You should be helping these.
He is. Easy people.
That's all I got to say.
So with the fertile soils, as you alluded to, that comes down to sedimentation, erosion. If those sediments are high in nutrients like phosphorus, yes, groundwater absolutely is a groundwater table, can play a piece.
So what do you do?
So we're talking specifically groundwater, or are we talking, well, groundwater, you gotta stop the water that hits the surface that leaches into those sediments that now gets into the groundwater at that point, and trying to keep those nutrients bound in that topsoil that plants can use. Through cultural eutrophication or human uses of the landscape, we break up soils. We now allow sediments exposed or soils exposed to natural water, snow, rain, ice, which then can leach into the groundwater because now you change the dynamics of the soil at that point, which then allows that to go into the groundwater. So groundwater, to a percentage, probably plays a piece of it, sure. What percentage? I don't know off the top of my head. That's not I deal with invasive species and plant management. That's my specialty. So I would be speaking out of tongue what that percentage would be. So
You guys gotta keep that. I heard, a lot of them just blown out. Really doesn't.
It's a lot of trying to identify areas that, not just for you guys, and where it's time, money, effort, and DNR acts a lot as educators and facilitators for money to try to identify those areas at that point. I have 17 counties, sir. I can't be everywhere. Unfortunately, I wish I could. I can't.
Pete, I think the bottom line is that we're one piece of the puzzle. There's multiple factors. I don't know, just because somebody has said, that had maybe no, doesn't mean we have to accept it as an answer. Or that at this time, it may be viable at this time, in the future, it may not be. Technology changes, practices change in the future. The best thing that we can do as an organization is be poised so that we can take advantage of it. Because you can't take advantage of a new technology, a new system, or new way of doing something if you're just beginning. Look what it took us. It took us 3 years just to get to the point where we're starting to have the right discussions. And so I think it's important that everybody understands that there may be some things that aren't applicable now, but that doesn't mean in the future that they won't be. Or that we can't have influence on certain things. And so to put a positive spin on your comments, I would just say that we're doing everything that we can, and we will continue to do everything we can.
Yeah, I can understand how Tyler can't come in here and promise us to let us like do whatever we want to do
Yeah.
too. I mean, it's a 1 hour meeting. The only thing I would ask you guys just to think of, for I lived around here basically all my life, like it's always been a problem. And I would just ask that, I think it's been recognized as a problem from the state level for a very long time, like maybe the idea of just being a little bit more open-minded, or like allowing us to try some things, because if you come out in August sometime, I'd be happy to take you for a ride around. Like
Yeah, we were there middle of July.
It's literally toxic in areas where it's turned blue, and like you go outside and you're smelling it, and I don't know, to me, it just seems like something you shouldn't probably be dealing with.
Yeah, people definitely get headaches and stuff, but you probably experience that too, just from the fumes that
So
come
even
out.
if it's
Yeah.
something like, I know some people on the lake that I know of bought these devices that just constantly like churn the water, just so it doesn't, if a bunch of weeds float in by your shore,
Yeah,
and then it grows on top of there, like being able to do things to at least mitigate that at the peak of the bloom, like those small improvements that maybe don't cost millions of dollars, but things like that, as landowners, I feel like we should be able to try some of that sort of stuff to see if it just, I don't expect it to be crystal clear grindstone. Like
Yeah.
it's never gonna be that, I know. But making those incremental improvements where it makes it a little bit more usable, a little bit less nasty, for lack of a better word, it would be my like starting goal. And just hope you guys would, if there are things that change in the future, if there are, I've read about some technologies that people say might help minimize the bloom in small areas, things like that. I think that's what we want to try to be able to do, to see if we can make any difference.
So you're thinking, we call them aqua thrusters?
Aqua thrusters is what I've seen out there right now, and it's pretty much so they can get a bone in and out of their dock. That sand that's coming in up out of the red cedar is taking. If you go on Google time lapse and watch that thing from where it was in the 80s to where it is now, and I think there's a pretty distinct cut in the timeline there when there was a dam that got taken out by Colfax there. It's taking ground every year. And I mean, I have friends that live up in that area that, well, when I was in high school 20 years ago, we could put a full-size boat in at Champney Boat Landing and go duck hunting up the river.
Mhm.
Now, I would just took a walk up there. I could walk out to the sand, like
Okay,
it's taking ground fast. And I feel like, and I can't speak for everybody on this board because I would never want to do that, but like we just sit around and continue to be like, well, let's manage the amount of phosphorus that's coming in, or there's nothing we can do about this sand coming in. It's like,
Yeah, and that's,
We got one more question and then we gotta
and
move
that's
on.
one too, just trying to keep green on the landscape is definitely the biggest thing that'll minimize.
So I was going to point to that. Thank you. Adam, or Grant, I agree with you completely. Those are very serious things. And I think that we have a group that's starting to move that way. Now, it won't happen overnight, but we got to do something. But the biggest thing he said that got to me was that we need to educate our landholder and landowners to not clear cut the shore. I mean, it's all about water coming into the lake. And he said wooded and other things are the best, and I keep hearing that over and over. But again, I see the lake become more and more grass right up to the shore for everyone's 100 feet. And landowners that want to see the water. It pains me to see the clear cutting of the shore that is A, not legal, and B, not good for the lake, but we're gonna complain about the lake water quality. Well, it starts at home. Let your shore grow up, keep the water from running in as fast as it can, slow it down, slow down the water, keep the nutrients out. It starts with your property.
Yeah,
That's
my,
the
my
first
old
thing.
man always said, practice what you preach.
Yes, it starts at your
Unfortunately,
property,
yep.
yes.
And you gotta try to do the best you can within your scenario. I mean, with healthy lakes, maybe one thing to do with, maybe you guys are aware of the folks, definitely don't go up to them if they got the perfectly manicured lawn and start pointing their fingers at them, because then that gets nowhere, unfortunately. But just say,
All
hey,
names.
John Doe, DNR has this rate your shoreline tool. Give them that and go, give your shoreline a score. I think it's from 0 to 10 is what it comes down to. And then have them kind of identify like, hey, my shore is only a 1.
What is that tool?
It's the rate your shoreline tool within our DNR Healthy Lakes program at that point.
Yep.
It's a way that we kind of allow folks to kind of have the light bulb moment to say like, hey, you know what, maybe I could be doing better versus you guys just going up there and pointing the finger at them and then just butting heads the entire time back to nothing goes on at that point in time. Pointing fingers is you scratch my back, I scratch yours is not going to happen is the biggest thing. I mean, definitely for you guys within the watershed, nutrients, sediment is the big thing because soil is exposed. Because you have fertile soils, you now have nutrient issues because of it, because that soil is now moving, because it's no longer bound to the land. So because of that, through water and water, as we've seen with valleys in the Grand Canyon and everything else too, water keeps down cutting and will win because it's always going, it's always moving. So trying to slow it down or to keep it there is the route to go at that point. So if you guys got farmers that, have a bunch of runoff coming off of their fields, but they don't have the money possibly, because that's money is always the big driving factor. Unfortunately, no one has enough of it. But if you guys got a few $1,000s to give to that guy, or can work with the county to help them buy a no-till drill or something as a possibility that the county now gives out to the farmers in the area to go ahead and use to try to keep cover crops in the landscape, that's the route to start going about it. Pete, back to Pete and Well, been doing that for years. The county bought it outright, and that lake group buys the seed for them, and all the farmers in the watershed do cover crops because the farmers, they only had an extra $100 here or $200 there. They couldn't pony up the cash to do it, but the lake group had enough. And the county said, this is definitely something we need to do. And they started something, and now it's done annually every single year. And they're seeing improvements in their water quality because they're now holding that soil the way it should be. Mother Nature always wants to be covered nice and green, and then the sediment doesn't move, or it minimizes how easily it moves at that point. So
it's illegal to clear cut your shoreline?
technically, no. There's definitely regulations as to what you kind of can do from a high water mark versus low water mark and how much you can take at that point. So high water mark and above is county enforcement, and each county has their own policies, so it can change from one county to the next. And then the water line below is where DNR jurisdiction takes place. So we can only recommend from the high water mark up what you should be doing. We cannot tell you what you should be doing from a DNR policy. If that helps you. Okay.
I'm gonna have to cut you off, Tyler.
Okay.
We're a little bit over time and I get credit for the length of our meeting. So thank you very much. if there's any other questions, I would hope that people would either reach out through Adam to Tyler, or directly yourself, if it's. If
Can
it's,
we share your PowerPoint on our website? Okay, we'll do that.
perfect.
Thank you.
And from the board standpoint, instead of Tyler getting 7 different calls from 7 different board members, I would put Adam, as our point person to
There we go.
put your questions. So if somebody has the same question, Tyler only gets 1 phone call. Does that make sense from a operational standpoint? And then you can be our contact.
I would assume we're gonna have some communication
Yeah.
with the harvesting permits and
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
That's why I kind of said that, so that
Yeah.
it makes sense to do it that way. And then that way, as a board, then we're not inundating Tyler with the same question.
I don't mind it if you do, because you're not the first place to do it, so if.
Well, I like to think that we're better than most.
Okay, yeah, I hear you.
How's that sound? All right,
Tyler.
thank you, Tyler.
No
Thank you
problem.
very much.
Appreciate it. Nice job.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
And Bob, I emailed
I
you
understand, I
um,
understand, I understand.
the study on the TMDL already, so it's in your mailbox, and if I took more time, there's a update, the 2023 update. I think it may have been in the January newsletter. I may have put that in there with everything that's going on in the flowage or in the Red Cedar Basin. But if not, I'll get that to you. Let me reload here. Okay. Recognition of visitors and visitor comments. Pete, anything else? Thank you. Commissioner communication. Does anybody have communication to the board? The one thing that I have today, I emailed you a discussion I had with Tina Lee, Dr. Tina Lee from UW Stout, about the guidelines, if they don't have the REU students this summer to do the studies that they've done research on Tainter and Monoman Lake every summer. They bring students in from all over the country. They're not, last time we talked, they weren't getting their funding. So I asked her, so what would it cost if we sponsored our own or funded our own study? And so she gave me that guideline. I gave it to you. I sent it out to you today. The idea, one of the things I talked to her about, and this came up at a meeting, was, so who's using our lake? And so on a particular day, is it people coming in? Is it residents? Who uses the lake? There's a study on that UW Stout had done a while ago. But who's currently using the lake? And I think that might be important information. Anyway, I sent that guideline to you. I think it was about a $1,500 expense to hire a student to do some summer work and create a research project around that. If you want to put it on the next agenda, that's fine. We can do that and talk about it. If not, we can kick it down the road. We can file it away as nice to know information. But
We do, Al, just a reminder, we do have access to our summer intern through the county,
right,
so.
yeah, well, this was a little more extensive
Right.
than, so anyway, I gave that to you. That's all I have. Treasurer's report.
Yeah, I emailed out our year-to-date income statement earlier today. Starting to get our tax levy payments coming in now. So that's good to see. That's kind of helped beef up the balances in the checking account. So today we were sitting at $28,183.47. And the checking account and our savings account has $1,134.10 in it. Paid the first bill to Short, Elliott, and Hendrickson for the strategic plan review. That got the first payment, first check cleared, and I sent the second portion of the payment out today. It hit the mail. So that's starting to come together.
Yeah, you're gonna get another one at the end of this month. I think we're at total about $3,100 is
Ye-
what, she told me yesterday. So,
Yeah, I think well, this one here that cleared already was $810.53. And then this
Right.
last one was only like $350, but
right.
the only thing I did have a question about is, so we haven't actually received the grant. We don't receive the grant reimbursement until the strategic plan is done. Is that how it goes?
No, we're supposed to get like 60% of it now, and she was gonna send us the money, and
Okay.
I haven't seen the money.
I more or less asked it. I want to make sure I didn't miss something.
No,
So-
you didn't miss anything.
Okay.
It's, yeah, I'm having a bit of a problem with that office.
Fair
right
enough.
now. I will, certainly send out another email asking about that.
Grant, can you repeat slowly this time?
Yep.
The balance for checking, 28,000
$183.47.
7. Thank you.
Mhm.
And remember, we got a $36,000 bill coming up in June, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Do I have a motion to accept the financial report? Or the treasurer's report? To
Make
approve
motion.
it. Okay, is there a second? Okay, Adam made a motion to accept the treasurer's report.
Jim
and-
did.
Oh, Jim? Oh, I'm sorry, Jim. And Chuck seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
I,
Opposed? Okay. Motion passes. Committee reports. Does anybody have anything to report from the committees?
I've been working with Jane Pierzina to try to develop a little bit of a fundraising program. She's been working with Jake's. It sounds like Tuesday, April 8th is gonna work to have it's more of like what we're thinking of it as a kickoff event where people can understand how the fundraising system would work and ask questions and all that good stuff. Peter agreed to give everybody that comes a drink ticket and some appetizers. So, I guess I hope we hit double digit of people that show up. But we're prepared for, maybe 100 would be the high end of what we would really expect. But I'll pass this down. It's something that Jane put together. It's just like a trifold brochure explaining what we've been thinking. So if you guys have edits or something you think is just way out of line, definitely just let me know. Pretty much what we chose to do is more or less copy what Shatek does as far as their levels of giving. And we thought we'd start there because that's a system that we know has worked for them, and rather than reinvent the wheel, just kind of do what they don't have done that way. So I'll pass this down, and if you got any questions, just ask me after the meeting.
Are we going to recognize past donors?
We sure can. It's all open. I mean, we've kind of just thought of it as very simple. Peter agreed to let us use the space, throw in the drink ticket. We had an anonymous donor that'll kick in some money. He's allowing us to bring in some of our own snacks type stuff, not like some big meal or anything fancy, but we got some cash rounded up for, so Jane will just run to the grocery store, grab some snacks, and then Peter said he could kind of fill in with some appetizers around that. So just pretty low key, pretty simple. We just wanted a way to kind of kick it off, and that would be a great idea to recognize past donors and and people that have supported the district as something to talk about and
Well, I think if we honor them, that kind of might seed the, water a little bit as to get some other people to contribute. And the other thing is, and it's not like we're starting from scratch.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That there have been people that have made, some, recommendations
Yep, so
or some contributions, excuse me.
that's what we've been up to.
Okay. Thank you.
I got a couple things, we're just, the aquatic vegetation committee is scratching the surface on. Reaching out to some consultants for the aquatic vegetation plan. We don't know that that's actually mandatory, however, it's tied to some grant funding, so I think we're thinking it's gonna be a good idea to pursue that. And the surface water grant to fund that, so Al's kind of in the know and quarterback in the grant thing, so.
Well,
Um,
I'm not that much in the know because they haven't come across with any money yet for the last one. So I don't know how much success I'm having.
You got the paper, but not the money, right?
Exactly.
So that's kind of in the works, and we've reached out to some consultants that would produce that document. They also write the grant, so it's something to consider. Other than that, aquatic plant management will be submitting the DNR permitting in early March for the harvesting project, and we're targeting for 3 spots, which aquatic plant management is pretty confident with their drone photos that should go through.
Okay,
So,
good.
Nice.
Cool. Well, Jim, the next 2 items on the agenda are yours. The one thing I will say is the February newsletter is out. I need pictures. Jim is, provides me with the pictures up to this point. But if you have pictures of the lake, send them to me and I'll get them in the, maybe take out your grandkids or your kids, but,
Do you want good pictures or bad pictures?
well, I mean, pictures, I'll make that judgment call.
Okay.
But I'm looking for pictures of the lake, I think, and pictures. And I was gonna take a picture of Tyler while he was here, while he was speaking to the group, but I forgot to do that. So that to put it in the agenda or into the next newsletter. But, the more you can give me, the better it makes that newsletter look, than just some of the articles. The other thing is Chuck and I met with Renee Kantz. The strategic, plan, I would say, is about 80 to 85% done. I'm hoping by the next board meeting, you'll get a draft copy of what we've gotten this far. She's done a nice job of reviewing what we've been doing. You guys have seen it in various forms and talked about it for about a year now. So it isn't gonna come as a surprise to you, but I think we're zeroing in on finishing that document. And I hope to get it off our to-do list by May for sure. And in final form. That's all I have. Okay. Anything else? Okay, first thing, Jim, you're up. No wake ordinance, final adoption, statutory or signatory process.
So we, a couple of meetings ago, we approved the ordinance as written, but there were a couple of procedural issues that needed to be taken care of. The town of Tainter had to not only repeal the existing ordinance, but they also had to grant us the authority to create and enforce an ordinance. And we kind of, when we passed it, we kind of created language saying that that it was contingent on them doing that. So while they were doing that, I noticed, and the town of Tainter did indeed repeal the no wake ordinance, slow no wake ordinance. and at the same time granted the Tainter Lake Rehabilitation District the ability to create our own and enforce our own ordinance. And while they were doing that, I noticed that, like the county does, they had, the paperwork and everybody signed it. And, so to have an ordinance that's typically you have signatures and everything else involved, so, I wanted it to be as, formal and official as possible with our own ordinance. So basically, you guys all have copies of it. You also got copies via email. But it's gonna be, I think we need to all, as commissioners, sign it. I have, elected Bob to be basically the witness to, our signatures, and then, you'll notice that, it has a line that, cause an ordinance has to be published and posted. And those are blank because those will be written in after it is actually done. So, when I was talking with Al earlier today, to kind of give us some time, the idea is to, post and submit to Colfax Messenger by next Friday, so that it would be, published by the following Wednesday. And then we would fill that date in on the official document, which will have signatures. Then this is also the documentation that a copy of, we will submit to the DNR with all the paperwork that they're gonna need to have as well. Since all of the legal steps will be done by that point. So that was the process with this meeting. So I have what's gonna be our official copy that we'll all sign, and then eventually, Tom, because you're the secretary, this will reside with you with any official paperwork that we have. But then also be posted and published. And I made sure I brought a pen that writes well, so that there aren't any scribbles or anything else on this. So if that's the case, I'll kind of start the process and just pass it down, and everybody can sign on, the dotted line. Well,
Do you need,
long line.
do you need a motion then, Jim?
I don't know, do we?
Well, why don't we just
We
make
should.
make
We
a
should.
quick motion? And then,
And I'll make a motion then that the Tainter Lake Rehabilitation District, pass and accept, or, pass the Slow No Wake ordinance officially, with, signatures by all the commission members, so that it can be, published and, officially recognized by the state of Wisconsin. How's that?
Perfect.
the guy I feel sorry for is Tom. He was trying to keep up with what you were saying, but the, is there a second to Jim's motion?
I'll second that.
Okay, there's been a motion and a second to, in essence, approve the Slow and Awake ordinance and to publish it and to complete the legal requirements. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any additional discussion?
Oh, any additional discussion?
So do you see this ordinance being rewritten if changes are made to the?
It would be, if there are any, anything that would be written, we would submit a new one to the board. And it would be amended at that point. So this is the same ordinance that you guys saw, I don't know, months ago. So there's been no change to it beyond that, except for it's official now.
Jerry,
Yes,
no. Yes, who seconded? Okay,
I did.
I'm sorry. Any other additional, discussion? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Nicely done.
Yes.
Now, pass the pen down. And I want my pen back.
I thought the president got to keep it.
No.
Okay, that being said, is there anything else, Jim, that's gonna come before our board on this topic, other than maybe the, purchase, a replacement of any of the buoys or those kinds of things?
I don't know that there's gonna necessarily be any other additional action, but more notification, because now this all gets submitted to the DNR. Bob and I are gonna work on the, updating the waterway permits. And, and then those will get submitted, and then they have a slight review process. But since, again, it's more or less transferring the existing ordinance, hoping that it's just kind of perfunctory, so.
Falls into place, okay.
And Bob, I'm gonna ask you to sign and print your name as a witness. Sign the top line and print on the bottom line. Yep, sign that line and then print your name below it. No, yeah, print your name there and sign it one line above it, so. Looks about the same. Right, as far as I know, that's official then, after it gets published, so.
Oh yeah, watch this. Okay, we good?
Think so.
Okay, good, thank you. Voting and Safety Committee, recommendation for no wake buoy policies and procedures. Jim, maybe you would explain this. Or, I mean, I tried to give a little bit of it in my board packet, but,
Well, essentially, we've already kind of approved having that process done, but Bob was on the committee, the Boating and Safety Committee with me. Thought it was a good idea to have procedures and policy with that process, because right now, we're going to work with Donkey Docs to do that work. However, if, let's say it's going to be another vendor in 3 years or something else, so it's going to be key to have procedures for when the buoys are removed, how they are taken care of, an inspection process for making sure that they were adequately cared for. And also, we've had a number of people that have expressed interest in donating buoys. The idea was then to outline some things with, like, you can't donate a buoy only if it's gonna go in front of your house. You can't put your name on it, or the name of your business, or things like that, because you can't do that with a waterway marker anyway. But just outlining those types of policies, and Bob did a very thorough job with this. And if you have questions about kind of how the document was put together, or some of the thought process, Bob's here to answer any questions, and us as well. But we've had at least three meetings where we've discussed this. Bob came up with the original idea. The committee bounced some ideas back and forth. We made several revisions, and then as a committee, we voted to accept this as our final document. And I don't know that we have any rules in place for how this body adopts something that, like, a standing committee puts together. And I don't think this rises to the level where it needs to be put to a vote to, like, the entire membership, because it's kind of like it's almost like the contract for harvesting. It's like that gets into the contract itself, that process, or that the budget needs to be approved. But this is kind of the nitty gritty, like, okay, now we got to get this stuff done. So the going ahead with the ordinance and having the budget was approved. Okay, now we need to responsibly spend that money for taking care of our no wake buoys. And here's the process for doing that.
It's a great document. It kind of brings to mind the technical issues of document storage and other things as we start doing project work that will make doing projects easier in the future after they've been done. So,
Well, and that was actually I brought that up to Al when I saying, okay, we've had this. Should this come up to the board for a discussion? And do we have a policy for document retention, storage outside of the fact that we have a secretary who that's their job, but where do they keep this stuff? Does Tom keep it in his house? In his garage? We don't have an office. We don't have a official repository outside of electronic documents, obviously can live on the website.
I just say, yeah, our cloud storage, I don't know how much is on our site I mean, it needs to be accessible to us and
Yeah,
possibly to everyone, yeah.
Stuff in the Google Docs, all have people edit, right, or right?
Yeah.
Whose account though?
Yeah.
Well, we share it amongst the board members.
Yeah, no, I don't think you can do it quite that way. And I agree with Jerry. There's two parts to this particular document. The first part is how we operate as a board. And like Jerry said, the technical component of what this is. What's the difference between a policy and a procedure? And the second thing would be the document itself. And I don't want to minimize the work of the committee. I think that you guys did an excellent job.
Yeah.
I have a little bit of concern of when it's titled subcontracting, purchasing and documentation policies. Because that means everything.
Yeah.
And so I'd really like it. The other thing is our policy procedure to this point has been, and we've had a long discussion about the policies and we've gone from a lot of them down to a little of them. We're kind of back into the middle of the road defining things. The uniqueness about us is we don't have an administrative entity like a town would have
a
a
clerk,
clerk.
yeah.
And an office and, yeah, we got Tom, but something happens.
That ain't much.
Something happens to Tom and our documents that we create are open to public record. And we do have to keep them. And we do have to store them forever. Okay? And so I'm just struggling a little. I have no problem with the procedure. I think you guys went a little bit too far personally. I would have made it a little shorter and I would have stated it in a letter of agreement, all of the conditions, and I would have had one person instead of two people inspect it. But I don't have a problem with that. The other thing is, I would say that, do we want it to put it into the policy or do we want to create as a procedure? And I would think that what we'd want to do is have board approval of the procedure of the committee so that the committee isn't making board decisions. Because this document then is what the board has to agree to. Do I make sense? I don't want to make something really simple complicated because that's what I usually do. But I'm just bringing it up for discussion.
I don't have any problem with it being called a procedure instead of a policy.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we talked about this with bylaws that, and we need a place to, I'm thinking more of the place to put it, but,
Right. Well, but your document storage, we should have a policy or procedure,
Well,
whatever we want to call them.
because that's like this ordinance, you know, the Tainter Town Hall, when I asked, because I have copies just so that we have verification that they passed their resolution granting us the authority, and they also repealed the ordinance. I have copies of those signed documents
Right.
that she stores there at the town hall. And so somebody could request to see a copy of this.
Right.
And right now that is going to be at Tom's house, which is not really publicly accessible with office hours. So this might have to be something we add to an agenda. It's like, okay, do we have to have some physical location for paperwork?
Yeah, and I would think the only time we get into any trouble with those kinds of things is if we're not consistent. We don't have an office. I don't think it's an unreasonable expectation that if somebody were to make an open records request, that they would go to Tom's house to get that, or to meet at the library or whatever. I just think that if you make that request, Jim, and Jerry makes that request, it's got to be the same way we handle that. That's all I'm saying. And if we want to call them board policy, instead of,
I mean, I really like what Jim's done with the website, you know, every agenda and budget and thing is a web page. If all our policies, I mean, maybe if we split them up a little bit more, but if each of our policies and or procedures are just published on the web, there they are.
right. Just a second. I just want to get on the board technical thing first, and I want to come to some kind of conclusion on that. So we're saying, what are we gonna call this? I guess that's what I'm confused about. Are we gonna call it a policy? We're gonna call it a procedure?
I'd call it a procedure. I mean, maybe maybe we didn't have to say policy on this, but maybe procedures is about it's just a set of objectives for taking care of the no wake buoys and also the donation of no wake buoys.
Right.
Maybe they need to be in two separate procedure documents.
Well, there is some policy in there, right? I mean, the policy is we don't accept buoys with Tom's face on it and says vote for Tom, or, you know, whatever it is. Something silly, right?
Right.
I mean, there are some policy there in this document that describes buoys and donations and stuff, which is
Positions,
fine.
right?
And then the procedures are great for dealing with the subcontractors in there. So it's a little both, I think.
Okay. Okay, so compromise, we'll call it board policy and procedures as opposed to bylaws? Or are we, what are we gonna?
Oh, board, yeah.
I just want to know what we're gonna deal with this so that the next time something comes up or somebody makes, well, how do you guys do this?
I think there's board policies and then there's board procedures.
Okay, and policies and procedures are within our purview and not the annual meeting.
Right, they're not bylaws, yeah, exactly.
Okay, I just want to make that distinction so that everybody's aware of that for every board policy, I don't want to have to explain this at an annual meeting.
Right.
Because it was like, it would take forever.
Yeah, no.
Then we'll wind up serving lunch at board or at that annual meeting. Okay, so the board, this is the board, what we're looking at is the board recommendation for board policies and procedures on the regarding slow no wake buoys. I want to make that distinction. It isn't our policy on subcontracting or
Purchasing.
other purchasing, because that gets us into, there's dollar amounts where we have to get bids. I want to be able to have this open enough so that we can negotiate, so that we're not always doing hard bids. For the dollar amounts here, it doesn't pay to go hard, bidding process. We can certainly there aren't that many people out there doing this, and so we
Yep.
can certainly negotiate. That's all I'm saying. So, Bob, you had something you wanted to add, procedure?
I just wanted to say that I think, where you're gonna see,
You better come up here to the,
um, yeah, I'm not against making, in fact, I kind of do see this more procedures than policies. My main, issue, and actually, yeah, was twofold. One was to, make it so that this isn't a situation where you're, because I've been in a situation where you're actually putting those buoys in and you got people yelling at you from the, hey, put it here or put it there. I want to nail this down so that it's not my fault. So I can say, this is the procedure and you have to talk to somebody else about this. And we can just go ahead. And that was the motivation for having two people. I was okay with having it get signed off by one. But this is a political issue. And we want to make it so that when we say we're going to put the buoys here, we're going to put the buoys here. And the other one was to make clear, good communication between those people and Grant. So that like Grant knows that the invoice is coming and that was laid out so that you could basically, so we tell, as you can read, we say, here, expect this invoice and don't pay it until we get approval. And that's basically it. And whether we want to later, maybe if things get more complicated, institute a formal purchase order numbered system or something, but I think emails would work fine for now. And I think where we have to be careful about the document placement is where you're gonna see, well, I don't know if it'll ever come up, but the basic motivation would be if somebody gets a ticket down there and they decide to fight it, the first thing the lawyer is gonna do is he's gonna want a copy of the ordinance. And he's gonna want to be able to prove that it's the current ordinance that's in place. So we got to be careful that we, for one thing, don't have multiple versions of this thing out there. And it's officially, well, you guys know what I mean. So
Yep.
those are the issues
we got it.
that I decided I should try to talk to committee into working on.
And once again, I'll just remind everybody, we had like at least 3 meetings where we went over this document and went back and forth about the one or two people inspecting, and it dropped to 1 and then we went to 2 because we figured it's not that hard to get 2 people to go and do something. I mean, right now our committee's back up to 5 people. So it should be fairly straightforward, and if it's always just going to be Bob and me doing it, it's just the 2 of us. But it's we just thought it would be better to have one person. It wouldn't just be on one person's shoulders to sign off on it and say, hey, you signed off on that, and there's a hole through that buoy and it sinks to the bottom of the lake. Why did you say that was okay? It's like, oh, because I was hungover. I don't know. Couldn't look at it. So 2 people. But welcome to change it. But we've again had 3 meetings about it, and it's a thing that I always remind people during our boating and safety committee meetings when they show up and they say, well, haven't you thought about this? It's like, no, we haven't. We just happen to have 10 meetings where we've discussed this, and this is the first we've heard of it. So we're welcome. I mean, the procedures we can change, but we have kind of gone through it and gone over it and thought that this might be the best way to deal with it. So
The only other question I would have, not to drag this out, I apologize. But you have from my understanding, you have a contract here with somebody or an agreement with somebody to put it in, and then you start with an agreement to take them out. Wouldn't you have an agreement to put them in and take them out? From the same company?
Not if that changes in the middle. If they go out of business or something
Well,
happens,
then you would start a new or a
Yeah.
new agreement.
right?
But I guess I'm saying, as a vendor, I'd want to know. I'm gonna put them in, but I'm also taking them out. Or don't you guys think along those lines?
Um,
I mean, most dock places, when you do your docks, you put them in and you agree to have them put them in and take them out.
It's probably ideal for the vendor, but just being in business, just because you put something in doesn't mean you get to do business there forever. And sometimes you get fired, unfortunately. I've had to live on that end of it before, and this procedure leaves the opening for if they put them in and we're fed up, want to try somebody else, we can, I guess.
Okay, all right. The only other suggestion I would make is that it's titled Board Policy and Procedures Regarding Slow No Wake Buoys. And eliminate the subcontracting, purchasing and donation.
that was Bob's idea. I'm gonna throw Bob under the boat.
That makes it general.
Yes,
So that
yeah.
you're not dictating other things. Board policy and procedures regarding slow no wake buoys. Because you define exactly what you said, but that's it. Because I don't want it to get confused with subcontracting. Okay, do I have a motion to approve this board policy and procedure?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, Jim made a motion. Do I have a second?
Sure.
Jerry is a second. To approve the board policies and procedures regarding slow and awake buoys. Additional discussion or questions?
Is it being split into two or is it just both? It's policy and procedure.
That would be both. I
Okay.
would just say both. Because it's one document. Make
Okay.
it simple. That, okay,
That's my only question.
okay. Any other discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Update on the carp bounty program and fish stocking. Tom or Chuck? Chuck, we haven't heard from you tonight. You want to give us a brief recap of what our committee meeting was?
Yeah, I think what we talked about tonight, and Tom Bills has done a ton of research on this, but we talked about it being a bounty program instead of a tournament program, but we're gonna get some expertise from Casey at the Wisconsin DNR. There is quite a few rules for the tournament end of it, and we can kind of go with what we want to do on the carp bounty end of it. So that's my suggestion. We picked the weekends of March or May 30th, 31st, June 1st, and Friday, June 6th, Saturday the 7th, and Sunday the 8th, which also happens to be free fishing weekend. I guess that's about all I have to say, other than we're working with a lot of other different organizations. We decided to go with muskies instead of walleyes because walleyes are in a pretty good shape stock wise for our lake. And the second reason, if we bought stocked walleyes, it may increase the vulnerability on the crossbreeding of our own walleyes. So we're going to go with muskies, and they're voracious carp eaters. So, and I think Tom says they're $18 a piece, 400 of them. It's about $4,000. They're going to be stocked the first week of November. Tom, what else?
Muskies Inc.
Pardon me?
Muskies Inc.
Yeah, we, actually, the Lake District approved $4,000 for the fish stocking project. And, I was lucky enough to be able to contact, the local chapter of Muskies Inc. And they, graciously, generously, approved matching funds for us. And then sent us a link to apply for grant money from their national chapter. Along with that, they offered to take care of the permitting process and order the fish for us and help us with the stocking process, which I don't think is going to be real difficult, but just the same, it's good to have people there that have done this before. In the last several years, they have stocked about 80,000 muskie in the northern part of Wisconsin. And so they should know what they're doing. So I can't believe just how enthusiastic the gentleman was and has been, that answered my email. So.
Yep.
It's a good thing.
Yep, so, and we're right, did you say we're writing a grant then?
Yes.
We're still writing that grant
Yep, yep.
to the national, so hopefully to get more money. Okay,
Stocked.
what?
How long?
10 inches, give or take. Yep. And they'll take about 7 years to reach, I think it's 35 inches, which is a size where they can actually be harvested.
What, is November like where they're low risk to predators or something?
Yeah, I can't remember the reason for it. It's gonna be the last week in October, first week in November, something like that. I think they wait until late in the fall simply to allow them to grow larger.
Gotcha.
The other thing might be the water temperatures are pretty cool, then puts less stress on the fish. The summer and the cleanliness of the water in November is good too.
In the heat, yeah.
Cool.
Oh, your mic's off, so nobody's hearing you. Or maybe it's dead.
Sorry about, I think it's dead.
Tom's is off too, everybody's. I think mine's still red.
Back in.
There we go. How do you do that?
Chuck's is good.
Here, let me,
Somebody's been talking.
Oh,
Am I back on?
Tom's back. I don't know.
Okay. Oh, we're back.
Jim must be working some magic back there or something.
As I said, this is the 17th different meeting that I've had since Al graciously assigned this project to me. And it's moving slowly, but it is moving. We received estimates on the engineering studies, and I believe there will be 3 engineering studies done during the completion of this project. The first bill will be for $12,700. And the bill was presented to the county, the DNR, and the Lake District. And we can all come up with the funds at some point. But it was my suggestion that the landowner was actually asked to put up this initial fund so the project can get moving ASAP. The landowner offered to do some cost sharing on this project. And he's a man with some means. I am confident that he will say yes. Maybe I'm out kicking my coverage there, but the two representatives from the county, Bob Kaner and Chase Cummings, plan to approach the landowner to ask him about that. So hopefully, if this all works the way it should, it could happen in 2026. I'm thinking it's more like 2027 that the project can actually get started, where we can get shovels in the ground. So that's kind of the update. That's where we stand.
So the question in front of the board is, you're all knowledgeable now, the circumstances, and what we're trying to accomplish. And I guess I'm just trying to gauge where the board's tolerance for participation in this, either monetarily or effort, or what, where do you see us going?
I see us all in on this. This is great work. I mean, the number one issue on this lake is that it's filling in. I don't know how else to stop it from filling in.
Well, if I can go one step further, Al, and ask an additional question, it would be, if we are all in on this initial engineering invoice, are we prepared to be financially involved, and at what level?
We don't have anything in a budget that we pass, but it may be something that we could definitely privately fundraise to help fund. I
Well,
mean,
and as I said, if it comes down to us paying for it, the project's gonna get kicked back until this fall. So we will have time to
annual
discuss it
meeting.
at the annual meeting, et cetera. So,
So you said there was 3 engineering studies that had to be done. Are all of them gonna cost the same thing, you
No.
think? Or are
no,
they
the
gonna
second one's a
go up?
little more, and I can't remember the final cost on the third one, but actually I was pleasantly surprised that that's all it's gonna cost.
Yeah, I mean, it's not gonna be hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Right.
It's gonna be,
Right.
let's see, 25, 30 or $40,000.
Somewhere in that
50,000
range, yeah.
maybe.
Well, a couple of things come to my mind is that we should have Grant make another bucket for sedimentation.
There is a bucket for sedimentation
Okay.
already. Yep.
So,
Mhm.
and that's one way to do it. The other thing is, with the understanding, that we give Tom, approval to go through and continue to, if he has to commit resources, he has to explain to the group, he has to come back and it has to be a part of our budget. Does that sound, I mean, does that give Tom some direction? Is that, and we'll let Tom, as a representative of the board, have a sense of where we feel that commitment should be, at least for a proposal. And that everything that, if we commit dollars, and if we're committed to the project, then we have to get it through our approval process and then through the annual meeting. That makes sense?
Yeah, anything that we want to pay for through the tax levy needs to go through the annual meeting, right? So I mean, we really,
Yep.
that's how it has to be. And
Right.
if we happen to gain traction, or we find somebody up at, who's really being affected by it up on that part of the lake that wants to, or a group of people that want to donate specifically to it, we can maybe be a little bit more agile and quicker on that end, but that's a big if, you know, and I don't know if we'll be able to produce that. It does, one of the big takeaways from Tyler today, it seems like he was pointing a lot to sedimentation. I mean,
Erosion is part of the problem. Okay, I guess I'm a little clearer now. I don't know if,
So there's two things. The board will support this project in private fundraising, trying to garner support that way.
right,
And two, we'll work to put together a project and have approved at the annual meeting.
well said.
yes,
I'm in on that.
yeah, I like it. I like it.
Anyone else?
Yeah,
My only caution is just listening to what he was saying is that the natural course of the river is going to, we can take all of that out, but it's gonna keep carving there. And is that going to ultimately, how much is that going to do?
I think I can answer that, Jim. Maybe not accurately, but if you want it accurate, you
Just answer it.
that's called politics.
Yep. A project this size and scope is not going to be a one and done. One of the things that I suggested was that we be allowed access to the finished project once a year, or, you know, the county be allowed access once a year to inspect it and to see if the final project needs to be beefed up. You know, a year, every year for the first 5 years or so, I think the county or some expert should be in there looking at this to see if we are losing ground. And if we are, what needs to be done? We don't want to wait another 50 years before we go back and start to maintain it. So I think if we maintain it regularly, it's probably not going to be nearly as big a deal as it's going to be the initial, as it initially will be, if that made sense.
And from talking to the engineers, I also think that there's some riprapping that has to be done on that, because like you said, if they don't do that, there's nothing that's gonna keep that from continuing to wash away. I think the other thing the engineers talked about too was putting some barriers before the bend, so it slows the water down. So between slowing the water down, putting riprapping in, and then cutting that bank back so that it isn't just sheer
Cliff,
drop,
yeah.
and those will do those kinds of things. But that's why I don't think the DNR is going to approve any project unless it has some of those components in that are going to make it so that it's a long-term solution as opposed to a kind of a,
There's going to have to be some work up above as well, because the water, excuse me, is moving through there and eroding the farmland
Yes.
as well. So, and that's very evident when you look at aerial photos of the property. What I can tell you is, if you want a good example of what I think they will do for riprapping, is make a suggestion to look at the riprapping at the Colfax wastewater treatment plant.
Sure.
You can get an aerial view of that. I was able to walk up to it. I was escorted to it, but, and it might be open to the public, I don't know. But they used big rocks. And they used a heavy, heavy tarp underneath them. So it looks like it's pretty well engineered, pretty well developed project. So,
Okay, so we're all in and what Jerry said. Okay, so we're committed to the project. And then any financial contributions will be made through the annual meeting and appropriately. Okay,
what I would like,
you need a motion?
well, no, I can wait until next month when we get the answer from the county's inquiry to the landowner.
Yeah, I would just as soon have a motion on something specific rather than a concept. If that's okay. You know what I mean? That.
Can I put forth a motion that states the board supports the work at the whatever site that's called?
Stewart property?
Stewart property site. In two ways, one, supporting the fundraising efforts, and two, working towards approving a project at the annual meeting.
Perfect. Yes, you may. That's specific.
I'll second it.
Okay, Jim and Jerry have been making all the motions tonight and Jim seconds it. Any other discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
I,
Opposed? Motion carries. Update on the plan of work, we're doing it. That's all we have to say on that.
Thank you.
Because I'm the only one that looks at it. We're just fine. I'm happy. Next meeting is March 20th. Jerry's in charge because unfortunately I won't be here, but I may be able to zoom in if you guys
Okay.
want to do that, but I'll get the agenda out and everything else like that. Future agenda items.
I put down a Lake District funded project through Tina Lee. I gotta dress that up a little bit, but
Okay,
that's what I started with. The other thing was the Lake District document storage procedure. If if you want me to store those documents, I'm happy to. I will buy another fireproof box and it will sit inside my fireproof gun safe. So something to think about for next month.
Sounds pretty safe.
You can tell where I have my priorities.
does anybody want to take a stab at doing, putting something in writing?
I just want to ask, do we need to store physical documents?
Yeah, because like Jim was saying, the signature pages, unless we can scan them digitally, I don't know what the legality part of that is.
Yeah, I mean, the township, she's got them in boxes.
Yeah,
And then when they're posted online, you'll notice that it says signature on file. So the ones that are online do not show signatures because that would not be cool for people to get all of our signatures for stuff. So that means the signature has to be on file somewhere.
right,
So it needs to, it's,
right, and contracts
Yeah.
and things like that. I'm just more worried about not so much fire or things like that, or requests for open meetings requests, and I'm more worried that when Tom gets tired of doing this work, that there's a very well-organized handoff to the documentation and that it isn't 5 folders and, well, it's in there someplace. And so I just think we need to, make that distinction so that there is some, not that Tom would do that. I'm not worried about Tom, but I'm just worried that we just talk about that.
I wonder if there is actually some state
That's what I was gonna say.
statute regulation about a quasi-government organization like we have.
That doesn't have a physical entity.
Yes, that it's, and it may be spelled out, and we need to follow those procedures.
If, if we put this off a little bit till after the April, Lakes and Rivers Conference, I'm going to go there. And there's always an attorney that stands around.
Sure.
Talking all the time. I have 2 other questions for him. And I will put this on there and why don't we do the document storage after I get some
Fine.
reading on that? How's that sound?
Excellent idea.
Okay, and you guys will have a very short meeting next month because there's not a whole lot on the agenda. And Jerry runs it.
Isn't it interesting that when you're not here, Al, we have like half-hour-long meetings? I don't know what that says.
Okay, I want you to know that it wasn't quite an hour with the work that we had to do. The education part took longer than what I won't take credit for that, but I will take responsibility for everything else.
Hey, before we adjourn, I just want to remind everyone that the conference is coming up at Stout in just a couple of weeks, so if you have not signed up, it's a good time to do so.
Yeah, one of the things I'd like to do is have you guys, when you get there, talk to some of the committee people and say if maybe we can have a lake association and district, maybe there can be a sectional there on that too. But see what they say.
We almost should have a booth there.
Right, that's the other thing. We should be there and say, here's who we are. Oh, the other thing I was gonna tell you, I'm gonna speak at the Rotary Club too, as to what a lake district is. So that's coming up in April.
And I'm gonna speak Monday night at the Dunn County Fishing Game.
So with all that said, do we have a motion to adjourn? Okay. Chuck, anybody's,
Second.
okay, Chuck and, Grant, made a motion to adjourn. We
Thank you,
are,
Chuck and Grant.
all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.
Let's see if I can find that lawyer's email.